As a lifelong anime fan, I've seen Genro clips floating around online for years, but I've never actually got around to seeing it. If you look at just the Rotten Tomatoes rating, it's not a very good movie. It's okay, but the audience rating favors it pretty well. But anyway, I've always wanted to see this movie. I'm going in knowing pretty much nothing, but I am excited as the aesthetic of older anime brings me joy, as it was all hand-drawn, so even if the movie isn't quote-unquote good, it'll probably be good to me anyway because of that sense of nostalgia all older anime has. The movie takes place in an alternate universe of Japan where after World War II, they attempt to rejoin the world stage through economic growth, but not through like social policies that would help citizens. That would be particularly silly. No one ever thinks about poor people when they say we want to make society better. Anyway, their attempt at economic growth leads to civil unrest, and instead of listening to the demands of people who are suffering enough that their protests turn violent, in a very predictable way, the people in positions of power turn to unreliable, state-sanctioned violence. Because using a military police force to force people into silence is much cheaper and easier than listening to poor people ask for dignity. Anyway, I already know I'm too dumb to articulate the inherent politics of the movie, so moving on. The movie seems to be centered around Kerberos, the military-style police force. They aren't needed as much as the sect, which is the name of the resistance force, has gone underground, but also society is moving towards a more prosperous direction apparently. There is a protest happening and it's turned violent. My interest is in if citizens aren't happy to the point that you have a rebel group forming, but also separate independent protests forming, wouldn't it just be easier to talk with and try to see why there's civil disobedience? Maybe that's why I could never be a politician. I'm not enough of a sociopath to sick militarized police forces on people who are essentially upset at me and what I'm doing as a politician. I find it hard to ignore random hate comments I get. I can't imagine ignoring my constituency. None of that is to say that the sect is heroes in this story. I don't believe that they are, or at least the story seems to be setting them up as not heroes, which I don't believe people have to be. I don't think people fighting oppression should be held to a standard you would never hold their oppressors. That aside, I don't really like the sect very much, or at least their methods. They implanted themselves into the ranks of protesters, used special Molotov cocktails to throw at police, had one of their members throw a bomb at the cops, the same bomb they had a child deliver only for them to scatter like roaches when they started arresting people. Logically speaking, shouldn't the goal be to move as many people to your side as you can and show them that your worldview is correct in order to strengthen your numbers? Not even just for manpower purposes, but politically. I'm curious what the sect stands for politically. Regardless, Kerberos catches up with the sect in the sewers where the sect is basically wholesale slaughtered. The sect does shoot first, but we see in the beginning of the movie that Kerberos isn't above shooting people who are unarmed, so I guess the sect's logic is, if we're going to die anyway, it might as well be in a fight. But a really interesting scene happens after this. The young girl who the sect had running bombs for them is running through the sewers to escape, as she was the first person to see Kerberos coming after she separated from the sect with a bomb in tow. She is running in the sewer in fear for her life until she takes just a moment to breathe when she notices a member of Kerberos right next to her, and she panics and begins to inch towards setting off the bomb.
Don't.
The specific member tries to tell her to stop, and the other members of his squad tell him to just kill her already. She eventually sets the bomb off, unfortunately. But what I find most compelling about these events is the emotion it conjures. I will always love a story where there isn't a clear-cut good or bad guy. Everything is kind of gray, especially if done right, and because I love stories like that, the moral question the scene makes you ask yourself is a good one. Who is better? Who deserves to come out on top and their politics be the rule of law in society? Kerberos, a state-sanctioned military police that is willing to mow down people who are unarmed, likely even civilians someday, or a rebel force that is willing to use civilians as pawns and children as couriers for explosives. As a group of old men are discussing the ramifications of a child blowing herself up, one of them says that the sect refuses to see themselves as the criminals they are, and it kind of caught me off guard for a moment because I often forget that people in positions of power who often enact unspeakable violence on others don't see themselves as violent or bad actors. Everyone recognizes that a lack of food, healthcare, or housing can lead to someone dying sick, cold, and hungry, but people's lack of that is looked at as a personal issue and not a political one. Withholding resources from someone even though you recognize that this person/people will die without it is violent. To give it more real-world ramifications and put it in a perspective, do you think a police officer who just shut down a homeless encampment and threw away these people's only belongings think that they are bad? Or do you think they simply view it as doing their job? Same as politicians. If someone is having an allergic reaction that they can die from and you have their EpiPen nearby and you refuse to give it to them, is that not the same as killing them yourself? It's the same concept. Withholding something that you could easily give someone is violent. Objectively speaking, this man, who I assume is a politician, is just as much of a criminal as anyone in the sect. It was already established prior that the protest was more civilians than sect members. If you have large-scale protests happening, maybe listening to those who are protesting would be beneficial. Kazuki Fusei is the member of Kerberos who was unable to shoot the little girl before she blew herself up. He was punished for it by having to go back to the military academy for retraining, but you can tell his heart isn't in it, which is fine. We stand growth around these parts. Though it does kind of remind me of why I've never really seen American military movies. From what we're told, he's new to Kerberos, so it's possible he's done nothing wrong, never even shot anyone before, but there's still some difficulty sympathizing with him because of how I feel towards the Kerberos unit overall, which is the exact same feeling I have around American military movies. I can't sit there and feel compassion, let alone not laugh in the face of a movie. I was trying to make the argument that yes, this white man was complicit in horrific acts inflicted upon a bunch of innocent civilians, but look how bad it made him feel. And because he feels pain about the atrocities being committed, maybe, just maybe, he feels the most pain out of all of us, and thus is the most human of us all. In the arms of the angel. Kazuki goes to visit the grave of the young woman who blew herself up and meets her older sister there, and the two of them grow closer, and I hope they don't do a romance subplot. I'm so painfully single that I see couples in public and my ass starts to itch and I start losing taste in my ears. Animes always have to force a love story. It's why I actually dropped the manga Vagabond. Vagabond is such a phenomenal manga. Then at a certain point in the story, it's like, you know what would really help you grow as a person? Coochie. Coochie will make you a stronger warrior, bro, I promise. As soon as you get into some honey walls, your power levels will triple, I swear. And then I had to quit because at this point, I'm accepting that I'm just going to be a wizard soon.
I'm going to be alone forever.
Kazuki continues to experience PTSD, which I don't think was real in 2001, so he's just having really messed up dreams as a result of his experience of a little girl blowing herself up in front of him. But these dreams are specifically about Kay, the little girl's older sister, being eaten by wolves, which is probably a reference to the Rogue Brigade within Kerberos that they touched on earlier. I'm a bit confused on why they haven't expanded on that unit very much, or maybe I missed it. My overall confusion aside, Kerberos, from what we're told, was always heavily militarized and would often have violent clashes in the streets against the sect. So they're not like a secret. The movie still has plenty of time to explore this, but I wish they would get more into how someone like Kazuki would want to join Kerberos. They're state sanctioned, but Kerberos is basically a mercenary force with government funding. So I think it's fair to say anyone who wants to join Kerberos is a little off in the head. Unless there was government funding and putting out propaganda that this unit is for the betterment of society and people should join. I think that would be super interesting. It kind of reminds me of those TikToks of people making the military seem awesome and that like you're missing out on something great, when in reality it's just you going to a country where you don't speak the language, hurting people for the interest of men in suits who would sooner use you as kindling for a fire than give you any sort of benefits like mental health care after you come back home broken and riddled with trauma. Maybe I'm boring, but I think a story, or at least touching on a sort of pipeline of how a regular average citizen, who if you ask them, are you a good person, when 9 times out of 10 say yes, how someone like that can willfully fall prey to joining an organization whose sole purpose is death and destruction. Speaking of evil organizations, a bunch of officials meet in secret about the future of Kerberos, and I'm not sure what it is, but there's something about the way anime talks about Japanese politics that feels so convoluted and makes it boring. And I definitely enjoy politics. I will watch an hour-long video essay on the history of the CIA's involvement in Latin America and have the absolute time of my life. But there's something about politics and anime that makes me go,
the Public Security Division.
I finally wake up after they're done talking and we find out that Kazuki's friend has tricked him, and the girl who we were told was Nanami's older sister is actually a part of the sect named Kei Amamiya. It's leaked to Kazuki that Kei and his friend are working together for some reason, though that just made me realize a lot of anime movies and shows runtime would be cut in half if Japanese government departments just worked together more. Kazuki gets a call from Kei even though he knows it's likely a trap set up because they want to catch a member of Kerberos with a member of the sect and still goes for some reason, which, okay, I guess. Like, he just kind of goes to this thing he knows is a trap to save her somehow, I'm assuming with zero plan afterwards. And now the entire city is looking for him and the girl with orders to kill on sight, which is the logical conclusion, but I don't understand why he didn't just quit or something. I understand his logic of having to save Kay as he had those nightmares of her being eaten by wolves. He has some sort of guilt, but what's the plan here exactly?
I owe you an apology. I wasn't really familiar with your game.
I apparently spoke too soon. Fusei was a part of the secret wolf brigade this entire time, which I feel like kind of ruins a lot of his character development, as it feels kind of pointless to show him as this character who feels genuine remorse and conflicted about his participation in these actions that led to the girl blowing herself up, but the entire time he's a part of this secret wolf brigade within Kerberos, and his time with Kay was more or less just an elaborate ruse on both ends. It gives it a kind of Romeo and Juliet vibe to it, which I'm not a fan of, but we gonna ball regardless, because before this revelation, Fusei and Kay have this big emotional moment of sadness, because Kay says,
"How about we take off? Far away, you and me."
But Fusei is like,
"That's not possible."
Only to lead her to the sewers where everything started, and they explain to her that as long as they have her as a bargaining chip, they can't be touched, essentially fulfilling his nightmare of throwing her to the wolves. God damn, he just emptied a clip into that man. This scene is kind of fire though, not just visually, but also for storytelling purposes, because the entire movie, Fusei is portrayed as a stoic man who is too emotional for this line of work. He's essentially too human for it, and yet he still does it. This is asked and answered earlier in the film.
But there are those who find comfort in living as beasts, no matter how much pain they have to endure.
This scene where he annihilates someone we are introduced to as his friend essentially perfectly shows why Fusei is quite literally a human who rather live among beasts no matter how much it hurts him. Fusei could have shot his ex-friend at any point as he was running away. He was shot in the leg, so he couldn't have run very far nor very fast, yet he waited until he was cornered and trapped with no escape. He didn't even shoot until Atsuhi used his trump card to try and kill Fusei, and even then Fusei still didn't shoot him directly. He wound up to it and continued to shoot him long after he was dead. Fusei wanted Atsuhi to suffer as much as Atsuhi made him suffer, and before Atsuhi is shot, he asks Fusei, "What is the difference between us? We're both human, right?"
What's the difference anyway?
Too human for this job, and I think the difference this scene is conveying is that Fusei knows he's a human, and yet he still wants to be a wolf, which I feel like makes him a sociopath in a way, but whatever. The movie ends with Fusei being forced to kill Kay in the end, which makes me sad, but then I realize Fusei isn't a good person. He never was. In fact, I would argue that he is worse than the average member of Kerberos or the Wolf Brigade. You could argue a lot of those people joined out of patriotism or sense of duty or anything where they believed ultimately they are right, and that makes sense. I would even go so far as to say Fusei is about as bad as someone who is a psychopath and joined the military with the intent purpose of hurting other people. He joined because he wanted to, despite knowing that they aren't good or doing good. He joined because he wanted to belong amongst monsters. His tears of pain mean nothing when you realize this is someone who, despite his emotions, decided to steel himself as best as he can and take comfort in pretending to be a monster. There are no heroes in this movie, just a bunch of people who are doing horrible things who believe that the end justifies the means, when in reality they're all monsters, though I will say I have much more sympathy for a resistance group than I do a military police force. That aside, I do see why this movie is good, but not great. There was a lot in there, and the world they built was interesting, but I feel like they didn't do enough with it. Hell, I don't think they did enough even with Fusei and his motivations. Why, by the movie's logic, would a human want to surround himself with monsters or the politics of the world, or even the sex for that matter? It feels like such a waste to set up this entire world only to focus vaguely on Fusei and how he's a human who wants to be a beast, but only still very vaguely, because it's more so about a Romeo and Juliet love story and how none of the departments in the Japanese government get along. I wish it did more, that's all. Good movie overall though.